International Women's Day. I did actually say when we spoke earlier in the week, I said, are you sure I should be speaking today? But I was assured it would be appropriate. So thank you for inviting me doubly so. I've just been introduced, and that's given a very good resume of what I am, who I am, and often those two things combine very much so. And the Evening Standard has been a lot of my life, and I used to work down the M4 in Reading, and that's where, when I was deputy editor of the Reading Evening Post, when it was a real newspaper, before the things that you talk about, the web and the other media came about, and at that time my then editor suggested I might like to join Rotary, which I did, and that was in the late 80s, and it was the Reading Abbey Rotary Club, and I've stayed there because it's an evening club and it allows me to attend, and even though I've been working in London forever. Now, the Evening Standard. I hope you will all see it regularly, and many of you will have seen it over many years. And I'll go back not so many years, but merely to 8 years ago. And up to that point, I'd worked for two Lord Rothermeres, and Vere Harmsworth, the old Lord Rothermere, was the proprietor who I first worked with. He was very much a revered publisher, and the family were. And so that was my employer. And then some 8 years ago, exactly this time of year, about slightly a month earlier originally, there was this rumour going around that the Evening Standard was being sold. And of course, it went around everybody, and everybody said what was happening, and it was completely denied. And I was on record of saying to Reuters that no, this story is not true. And then I had a call. In fact, I was driving into the office at about 6 in the morning from the editor-in-chief, Paul Dacre, to say, actually, the paper had been sold. So I started that year working for Lord Rothermere, and I ended it working for an ex-Russian KGB spy, Alexander Lebedev. And the paper was bought by Alexander Lebedev, and for the grand total of £1. And the reason it was bought for £1, or was sold for £1, was that in that financial year of the company, it was on course to lose £30 million. And as everybody who deals with business will know, that there are debts behind that. And so it was bought for £1. It was a big shock to many of us, but the biggest shock was that the paper probably would have closed without that. So it then transcended that we had a new owner, and the new owner came on the first week. We had a new editor, Geordie Greig, who had previously been editor of Tatler, but before that, been with the Sunday Times and the Daily Mail, and he was very well connected, and he was a very, very good journalist, and those two things helped him be the fixer, if you like, for the Lebedev family to buy the Evening Standard. So Geordie came in, and I met him in the preceding month after the sale, and he started on the Monday, and he came in formally on the Monday and took the morning news conference. And at that time he said to me after the conference, he said, tomorrow, he said, the publisher, the new owner, would like to come in and address the staff. And I said, yes, of course, fine. And he said, and he's bringing, and he sort of muttered, Gorbachev. And I said, sorry? And he said, yes, he would like to bring in his good friend Gorbachev. I said, Mikhail Gorbachev? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. Anyway, he said, anyway. I said, no, you can't say anyway. Let's talk about this. And we arranged it. And the following day, in the morning, the new proprietor, Alexander Lebedev, came in with Mikhail Gorbachev. And they addressed the staff. And it was, I've had various epic and sort of surreal moments, but this was beyond any of the others. And that we did tell the media, and we had BBC and Reuters and everybody else came in and wanted to come in with it. And I said to Geordie beforehand, what security? And he said, no, he'll bring somebody. And he actually just did bring one security man with him, who was about 8 foot tall and 6 foot wide, but he did have one security guy. But he came in, and we knew Mikhail Gorbachev was quite short, so we did put out the sort of a John Major style soapbox for him to stand on in the newsroom. And he spoke in Russian, because he can speak English, but he doesn't like to speak much. So he spoke in Russian, and now most of us, in fact all but one, didn't speak Russian or in the newsroom. And there were about 100 or 150 journalists in the newsroom at the time. And he spoke in Russian, and Alexander Lebedev, who obviously was now the publisher, and said, it's okay, so I would translate. Mr. Gorbachev says, Alexander Lebedev is a fine man and to be trusted. Fortunately, the one person in the room was Anna Kelboy, who had worked in Russia for some time, and she did vouch for the veracity of that translation. But it was a beginning of a roller coaster ride. And what happened after that, you will all know, is that within a few months, it was actually within 6 months, the Evening Standard went to a free newspaper. And that was a big shock, twice over. One, that the Standard became free, and what shocked the industry was that the Standard retained its editorial excellence. It retained its reputation for being a quality newspaper. Normally, if something goes free, it becomes a watered-down, celebrity-driven publication. And the Standard, it was a conscious decision by the Geordie Greig, who I mentioned, the editor, who had the confidence of the owner to retain the paper as a quality newspaper, as a very similar to the previous paper, but with certain changes, but not a free sheet as people came to know it. Just prior to the sale, the Evening Standard was selling about 200,000 copies, there or thereabouts. When I first joined the Standard in the 80s, it was selling 500,000, and it had dropped from over 500,000. In the early 90s, it was 500,000, down to about 200,000 on a good day. And when we went to a free newspaper, we retained the pagination, retained the salary bill of editorial, and it increased the numbers of copies printed. And initially we went to 600,000, and we found they went very quickly. Everybody wanted it. And some people even tried to give their 50 pence to the vendors, and because they'd always given them 50 pence, and they just carried on doing it. And but it went to 600,000, and the advertisers liked it. So more advertisers came in, and because it was going to a greater number, the advertising was more costly. We then went to 700,000, and it still was successful. And it then went to, and it still is, 900,000. So it's 900,000 copies, which translates to best part of 2 million readers, because if you go on the tube, if you put a copy down, somebody else will pick it up. If you take one home, more people read it, and so forth. So the London Evening Standard has metamorphosized itself from a basket case to a success story. And it's not by accident. And these things happen. I'll go more in a moment onto the multimedia, but the other thing which I hope you will have seen, which ties in with the Rotary spirit, one hopes, is that the Evening Standard not only reports the news, but we've tried, and this again, I say again, Geordie Greig, who was the editor, who I moved on from us in his original few years, did, and that was to introduce real campaigning. Every newspaper, every publication has a campaign. It's what we do and always have done. But when Geordie became editor, he was looking for a different type of campaign, and we came, having investigated various things, on one which was called The Dispossessed. Basically, it was championing the causes of members of society who'd fallen out of society, and that they were fallen between the gaps, even the gaps of charity. And there were individuals, families who were for no fault of their own, had fallen through the gaps. And this resonated with London. The case stories resonated with London. And we said we would look to launch a campaign in the hope to raise £1 million. The £1 million was raised within a month, and then it was 5 million. And subsequently, we've changed or moved on with The Dispossessed under the banner of that to other campaigns, and they varied from a Get London Reading campaign, which was to introduce into schools individual volunteers who would help children under the age of 10 learn to read, because it was found, one of our investigations, that children, a quarter of all children, 1 in 4 children, left primary school unable to read. So this was launched and resonated again with royalty, prime ministers, and most importantly, the readers. And that achieved its aim. We've held other campaigns which include means of putting in local groups to help build up communities, and if not stop, to find ways of pulling back from the gang warfare of teens killing each other. Estates such as the Angeltown estate in Brixton, where it had again fallen out of any degree of confidence among itself or there. We're now up to £16 million. We've raised £16 million through matching grants and companies and so forth going through. So it is a success story that has gone through. Now, we talk about the internet and clearly nowadays, and I absolutely support what you said, and I agree with what you say about there will not in, I was going to say our lifetimes, possibly longer, that it will not be the end of newspapers, but unquestionably there is a movement, a gradual movement at present, and it has been for at least 10 years, for more and more people to get their news on multimedia platforms. It can be mobile phone, more and more so, or on the desk computer, or iPad, or any form. And the truth is that it would be madness for any publisher now to say, no, we're a newspaper. We don't do those things. And in fact, they did do that for a while. And in America, I think the US made a complete hash of it. We didn't do it brilliantly, but the Americans made a complete hash of it, and whole cities, including San Francisco, were without any mainstream newspaper, because they did just bury their heads in the sand and then didn't move forward. Our newspaper groups have done slightly better than that, and in the last 5 years have done much better, and so any newspaper group is no longer that, it's a publishing group. It's a media publishing. And our group, which includes The Independent, which Alexander Lebedev bought after he bought the Standard, that was felt that it was not sustainable as a printed newspaper for other reasons as well as the obvious, and it went to just online. And the Independent, when it closed as a printed newspaper, it was selling about 40,000 copies. It is now, as a website, a multimedia site, and also an app. It is now, it was 40,000 copies. It is now 80 million readers. That's, I can't even work out the arithmetical increase on that, but it's from 40,000 copies to 80 million across worldwide. And in fact, during the Trump period, as in the Trump news, the headlines, it went to 100 million. And that's, it's still, people talk about different websites being, they call it chick feed, and sort of just traffic to generate, stories to generate traffic. The Independent is still relatively, it is editorially driven, and it is editorial substance, which does show that people still want editorial substance. And so the industry has moved on. And the Times is now finding, thanks to Brexit, thanks to Trump, that more people now are buying the Times than before, because it's brought forward only a small percentage, but it's a percentage increase. It's brought forward that interest in wanting veracity of news, accuracy of news that you can trust. And they have also found an increase on the some multimedia and the platforms. So there is a change. There's been a major change, including the ownerships, but no more of a bigger change than with the Standard. But just sort of going right back to, we talked about the history of the Standard being around forever. And when it was launched, and this was even before your family were carrying it around, in the 1830s, it was when it was launched, it took on other newspapers at the time in 1830s. And within a few years, one of the other newspapers at the time closed because the Standard was going through. And then there was another newspaper which was launched and did very well. So the Evening Standard put in a price cut. They halved their price to 1 penny. This is 1840. They halved their price to 1 penny, and they kept that price, the 1 penny price, for 100 years. Now that's sticking with a policy. Many of us talk about sticking with a policy. Now that really is. But it shows, though, that we all talk about the industry changing fundamentally. It's always changed fundamentally. It's always been that way. And now it certainly is. But that continues, and there is a future there in publishing. And print, I believe, like you, that it will be around for a long while, because an awful lot of people still want their paper. And in London now, there are more papers printed and read than ever. And that's than ever, because people say, no, print is dead. It's not. In the morning is Metro, and that's nigh on 1 million copies. Then in the afternoon, evening, there's the Evening Standard, and that's nigh on 1 million copies. And then all the national newspapers, still the regional, local papers, the borough papers, although there are fewer of them, there's still that number. So it's around for an awful long time. But the publishing will definitely continue. Back to the Lebedevs. Alexander Lebedev was in Moscow and still is in Moscow. lives in Moscow, when he bought the Standard. He handed over the whole of the papers to his, the ownership to his son, Yevgeny Lebedev, and he will be the one that you will have seen in the paper. His particular passions are supporting some of the campaigns we've been talking about, and particularly ones over the Christmas campaigns, and the most recent was Centrepoint, Helpline Centrepoint, which had Prince William supported, and also the wildlife in Africa, and he is particularly passionate about the elephants, saving the elephants and the wildlife in South Africa, and in Africa, sorry. And publishers, people say, so what's it like working for a Russian? They're great, because they got involved and they stay away. And you can't wish for better than that. And the last thing to show, it's not always been that way. Among the various people I've worked with and worked for, Robert Maxwell, and he was a publisher who didn't stay away. And the one thing epitomises what he was like. He used to walk through the newsroom of an evening and to the various things to the editors. And on one occasion, Mike Malloy, the then editor, was walking behind him when he was doing this, and Maxwell turned around to him and said, "What time is it, Malloy?" And Malloy said, "What time would you like it to be, Mr. Maxwell?" So it's always been the same, but the Lebedevs, they're fine with me. They've not been involved in the content, in the direction of the paper. I'm happy to answer any questions. Wow.